The company gala was a dazzling affair, held at a lavish hotel ballroom adorned with elegant drapes and sparkling chandeliers that cast a soft, inviting glow over all the attendees. It was an evening meant for celebration and networking. Yet for Lisa, it became a night that would stir unexpected emotions and challenge her perceptions of loyalty and attraction. Lisa and Dan, a devoted couple, had arrived hand in hand, mingling with colleagues and friends, their interactions filled with laughter and the comfortable ease of a long-standing, loving relationship. Dan, proud to have his wife by his side, introduced her to co-workers with a beaming smile, his admiration for her evident to all. Then Mr. Carter made his entrance. As the boss of the company and Dan's direct superior, his reputation preceded him: charismatic, influential, and exceptionally successful. When he approached Dan and Lisa, his presence was commanding, and his focus on Lisa was immediate and intense. Mr. Carter extended a hand, his voice smooth and confident, his eyes locking with Lisa's in a gaze that seemed to look right through her. "Lisa, it's wonderful to finally meet you," Mr. Carter said, his handshake firm yet lingering. "Dan has told me so much about you." His words, though common courtesy, felt laden with a deeper interest. His smile just a touch too warm, his proximity just a bit too close. Lisa, taken aback by the force of his personality, felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected, a thrill of excitement, a flutter of nerves. As the evening progressed, the gala unfolded with a vibrant energy. Employees laughed over glasses of wine, music filled the air with lively tunes, and couples danced gracefully across the dance floor. Lisa and Dan participated in the festivities, yet Lisa found her mind wandering back to Mr. Carter's initial look, the way his attention had made her feel seen, perhaps more profoundly than she had anticipated. Mr. Carter seemed to appear beside them at various points throughout the evening, always engaging, always directing much of his attention towards Lisa. He shared stories of his travels, his experiences leading the company, and his ambitious plans for the future. His words were not just conversation. They were an exhibition of a life lived boldly, of risks taken and rewards reaped. Lisa couldn't help but be drawn in by his narratives, each tale enhancing the allure of his character. As they spoke, Lisa noticed the way his hand occasionally brushed against hers as he gestured animatedly, the way he leaned in slightly closer when others joined the conversation, as if to maintain a private connection amidst the public setting. With each interaction, she felt an increasing pull towards him, a dangerous gravitation that she knew she should resist but found herself struggling to ignore. Dan, ever the proud husband, seemed oblivious to the charged exchanges. He laughed heartily at Mr. Carter's jokes and nodded appreciatively at his insights, proud to see his boss taking such an interest in his wife, interpreting it as a sign of his own professional respect within the company. Lisa tried to mirror Dan's enthusiasm, but found herself increasingly conflicted, her heart racing with a cocktail of guilt and excitement. The night reached its peak, and as Lisa stood watching the dancers, Mr. Carter joined her once again, offering her a drink. "You really bring out the life of the party," he commented softly, his words for her ears only. She turned to face him, his proximity overwhelming, his gaze intense and searching. It was a pivotal moment, one that could lead down a path she had never intended to explore. In that instant, as the music swelled and the crowd laughed, Lisa stood at the edge of a precipice, caught between the life she had built with Dan and the intoxicating allure of what Mr. Carter represented. It was a moment of unexpected attraction, filled with the thrill of the forbidden and the profound awareness of its consequences. In the weeks following the gala, Mr. Carter's presence in Lisa's life became increasingly pronounced. It started subtly at first: extra comments on her posts on social media, casual invitations for Dan and Lisa to join him at high-profile corporate events. Each interaction seemed innocent on the surface, yet with each encounter, the undercurrents of something more lingered in the air around them. Lisa found herself both anticipating and dreading these meetings. Whenever Mr. Carter was around, He had a way of making her feel like the most interesting person in the room. His attentions, while flattering, also ignited a conflict within her. She enjoyed the way he listened intently when she spoke, how he seemed to value her opinions on matters both trivial and significant. This was a stark contrast to her interactions with Dan, who, caught up in the demands of his job, often seemed too weary to delve into deeper conversations when he returned home. As spring turned into summer, Mr. Carter invited Dan and Lisa to a dinner under the guise of discussing potential advancements for Dan at the company. The evening was warm, the sky a lingering twilight as they arrived at Mr. Carter's well-appointed home. The setting was intimate, a small gathering with only a few other guests, which gave Mr. Carter ample opportunity to engage Lisa in prolonged conversations. Throughout the dinner, Mr. Carter shared stories of his travels to exotic places, his efforts in philanthropy, and his adventures in the wild outback of Australia. Each story was more fascinating than the last, painting the picture of a life lived boldly and without regrets. Lisa was captivated, not just by the tales themselves, but by the passion with which he recounted them. It was easy to see how someone could get swept up in his world, and for a moment, Lisa allowed herself to drift into that current. As they moved to the patio for dessert, Mr. Carter seated himself next to Lisa, their chairs slightly more secluded from the rest of the guests. The conversation shifted to personal aspirations and dreams. Lisa found herself sharing her own hopes, some that she hadn't even voiced to Dan, drawn out by Mr. Carter's genuine interest. He listened, nodding thoughtfully, his responses insightful, showing that he understood her on a level that felt both exhilarating and dangerous. "It's important to pursue what makes you truly happy," Mr. Carter said, his voice low, earnest. "Too many people wait for the perfect moment, not realizing that life is in the here and now." His gaze met hers, steady and piercing. Lisa felt a shiver run through her, a mix of fear and thrill at the intimacy of the moment. Driving home later that night, Lisa wrestled with her emotions. The guilt of enjoying Mr. Carter's company clashed with the excitement of being understood so deeply. She told herself it was just a harmless friendship, that enjoying someone's company was no crime. But deep down, she knew her feelings were edging into dangerous territory. She was drawn to Mr. Carter in a way that went beyond mere friendship, and that realization scared her. Back at home, as she lay beside Dan in their bed, Lisa felt a gulf open between them. It was as if in speaking her dreams aloud to Mr. Carter, she had somehow distanced herself from her husband. Dan, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her, slept soundly, while Lisa lay awake, the moonlight casting shadows across the ceiling, a silent witness to her turmoil. The following days did little to ease her inner conflict. Encounters with Mr. Carter, now more frequent, were fraught with an unspoken tension. Each smile, each seemingly innocuous touch on the arm, felt like a step further into forbidden territory. Lisa knew she had to tread carefully, to guard her heart against the charm of a man who could unravel the life she had built with Dan. Yet, with every meeting, with every shared laugh and exchanged glance, Lisa found herself slipping, inching closer to a line she had vowed never to cross. During one seemingly ordinary afternoon, Lisa visited Dan's office to bring him lunch, a small gesture to inject some warmth into the increasing distance of their daily routines. The office was quieter than usual, the hum of activity subdued, as many team members were out for a client event. Dan was in a meeting that was running late, and Lisa decided to wait in his office. As she set down the lunch on his desk, her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Mr. Carter. He stood there with a casual ease, his presence filling the doorway. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice smooth, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He entered the room, his movements confident and self-assured. "I was just dropping off lunch for Dan," Lisa explained, feeling her heart rate quicken. The room suddenly seemed smaller, the air charged with an energy she wished she could ignore. "I see," Mr. Carter replied, closing the distance between them with a few short steps. "He's lucky to have someone so thoughtful." His tone was complimentary, but there was an undercurrent of something else that Lisa couldn't, or perhaps didn't want to, identify. The conversation that followed was laden with an intensity that hadn't been there before. Mr. Carter asked about her, about how she had been feeling, about her dreams and aspirations, things Dan seldom had time to delve into. Lisa found herself talking more freely than she intended, drawn in by Mr. Carter's genuinely interested gaze and attentive posture. As she spoke, Mr. Carter moved a bit closer, his eyes locked on hers, listening intently. Lisa was acutely aware of every detail in that moment, the way the light caught his features, the subtle scent of his cologne, the warmth radiating from his proximity. It felt dangerously comfortable, too comfortable. Before she fully realized what was happening, Mr. Carter reached out, his hand gently touching hers. The touch was like a spark, jolting Lisa from the pleasant fog that had enveloped her. The room felt suddenly stifling, the air too thick. Mr. Carter's face was closer now, too close, and in a moment of weakness, a moment where the quiet of the office seemed to stand still, he leaned in and kissed her. It was a brief kiss, but one loaded with all the tension that had been building between them. Lisa's initial shock gave way to a rush of conflicting emotions. Part of her melted into the kiss, lost in what it represented, a longing for connection, for being seen and understood. But just as quickly, the reality of the situation crashed down on her like cold water. She pulled away abruptly, her heart racing, her mind screaming at her betrayal. "I can't," she stammered, stepping back. "This shouldn't have happened." Mr. Carter looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment, then nodded slowly, stepping back as well. The room was quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now, heavy and uncomfortable. Lisa gathered her things quickly, her hands trembling. She needed to get out of there, to breathe, to think. She muttered an apology, though she wasn't sure for what. For the kiss, for leading him on, for not stopping this sooner. All of it swirling in her guilt-ridden mind. As she hurried out of the office, the cool air of the hallway felt like a small relief against her flushed skin. But the relief was fleeting. What had just happened was a mistake, one that could not be easily undone. It threatened to dismantle not just her marriage, but the professional respect she had for Dan and for herself. Driving away from Dan's office, Lisa's mind was a tumult of regret and fear. How could she face Dan knowing what she had just done? How could she mend something that felt so irrevocably broken? The kiss, though brief, had changed everything. It was a line crossed, a boundary broken. Lisa knew that the path ahead would be one of difficult choices. The need to confess weighed heavily on her, a burden she now carried alone. Yet she feared the fallout that was sure to follow. The weight of the secret she carried home that day was suffocating. Lisa could feel the texture of every lie she would have to weave into conversations, every smile she would have to fake. As she walked through the door of their home, the familiar sights and smells that once brought her comfort now seemed to mock her with the normalcy she feared she had shattered. At home, Lisa's behavior had noticeably shifted. She was quieter, more withdrawn. The lively conversations that she and Dan used to share over dinner were replaced by monosyllables and long silences. Dan noticed her lack of appetite, and how her eyes no longer met his with the same warmth and openness they once did. The connection they shared, once vibrant and filled with mutual affection, now felt like a fragile thread about to snap, strained under the weight of unspoken truths. Dan, perplexed by the sudden change in Lisa, initially thought stress or illness might be the culprit. He suggested doctor visits, asked gently if there was anything bothering her at work, or if something had happened with her friends. But as days turned into weeks with no improvement, his concern deepened into suspicion. His wife's behavior didn't seem to stem from external pressures. It seemed far more personal, far more internal. One evening, unable to bear the widening gap between them, Dan confronted Lisa. They were in their living room, a space that had witnessed countless nights of laughter and deep discussions. Now, it was just another room echoing with the hollow sounds of a marriage in turmoil. "Lisa, we need to talk," Dan began, his voice firm yet tinged with worry. "You've been distant. Disconnected. I barely feel like I know what's going on with you anymore. Did I do something wrong? Is there someone else? The directness of his questions took Lisa by surprise, her heart racing with the fear that her secret was not as well guarded as she thought. She saw the pain in Dan's eyes, a pain she had put there by her own doing. This confrontation was the moment she had dreaded, the point where all roads led to a decision she wasn't ready to make. Confess and risk everything they had built, or remain silent and let this secret eat away at her soul. Dan, Lisa hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. She wanted to tell him everything, to pour out her guilt, her moment of weakness, to explain why and how she had let herself get so lost. But fear gripped her, fear of losing the man she truly loved, fear of the repercussions that her honesty might bring upon them both. Dan waited, watching her struggle with her words, his heart sinking with each passing second. He had always believed in honesty, in facing problems head-on, but seeing Lisa like this, tormented and torn, made him question if he really wanted to know the truth. Lisa looked at Dan, her eyes welling up with tears. "I'm so sorry, Dan. I've been feeling lost, disconnected from everything, even from myself." Her voice cracked as she spoke. "I made a mistake, a big mistake. It didn't mean anything, but I can't keep this from you." As she confessed, revealing the encounter with Mr. Carter and the kiss that should never have happened, the room felt colder, smaller. Dan listened in silence, his face a mask of stoicism that belied the turmoil inside him. Each word Lisa spoke felt like a blow, not just to his heart, but to the very foundation of their life together. When she finished, the silence that followed was deafening. Dan's mind raced as he processed the betrayal, trying to reconcile the image of the woman he loved with the actions she described. The pain was sharp, raw, and overwhelmingly complex. He stood up, needing space to think, to breathe. "I need some time," Dan said quietly, before walking out of the room. Lisa watched him go, feeling the chasm between them grow wider. She knew that this confession, necessary as it was, might be the undoing of their marriage. But she also knew that keeping such a secret was no foundation for a future, not if they wanted to rebuild from a place of trust and honesty. Left alone, Lisa felt the full weight of her choices bearing down on her. The future was uncertain, the path to forgiveness unclear. But in her heart, she knew that coming clean was the first step towards healing, no matter what the outcome might be. In the aftermath of her confession, the days that followed were fraught with a tense silence that often filled the spaces between Lisa and Dan. Both were grappling with the fallout of Lisa's revelation, each in their own ways. Dan, deeply hurt, but valuing the honesty that Lisa had shown by confessing, found himself at a crossroads between his love for Lisa and the sharp sting of betrayal. During this period, they both agreed that seeking professional help was essential if they hoped to salvage their marriage. They began attending counseling sessions together, a safe space where they could express their feelings, fears, and frustrations under the guidance of a therapist. These sessions were challenging, often emotionally charged as they unpacked layers of their relationship that had been neglected or hidden beneath the surface. Yet, each session also served as a stepping stone toward understanding and healing. Dan's decision to confront Mr. Carter was another pivotal moment in their journey toward healing. The confrontation was not aggressive, but marked by Dan's need to assert boundaries and protect his marriage. He met with Mr. Carter and expressed in no uncertain terms how inappropriate and damaging his actions had been. This meeting, although extremely difficult, was necessary for Dan to regain a sense of control and to make it clear that his marriage was not to be interfered with. Throughout this time, Lisa and Dan slowly began to rebuild the trust that had been eroded. They spent more time together, engaging in activities that brought them closer, rekindling the affection and understanding that had characterized their relationship before this crisis. They talked more openly than ever about their needs, desires, and future aspirations. This newfound openness became the foundation upon which they started reconstructing their bond. Renewing their commitment to each other involved more than just forgiveness. It required a daily effort from both Lisa and Dan to be present, considerate, and more transparent in their interactions. They established new routines that ensured they were spending quality time together, whether it was a quiet evening walk or a designated date night each week. These moments allowed them to reconnect not just as spouses, but as best friends who enjoyed each other's company. The process of healing also included revisiting and creating new personal and mutual goals. They discussed what they each envisioned for their future, acknowledging that while the path might not always be smooth, their commitment to walking it together was firm. They learned to celebrate small victories, each day that passed without distrust, every conversation that ended with a smile, and every night that brought them closer even in the smallest ways. As trust was gradually restored, intimacy followed. It was slow to return, with both feeling vulnerable, but their emotional connection deepened through their shared experiences and the efforts they both put into understanding one another better. This renewed intimacy was not just physical, but emotional and intellectual, with both Lisa and Dan feeling more connected than they had been even before the incident. Closure did not come as a definitive moment, but as a series of small acknowledgments and acceptance of their past, present, and future. They learned to forgive, not just each other but themselves, acknowledging that while they could not change the past, they could influence their future. The incident with Mr. Carter, while painful, had ultimately served as a catalyst for growth and deepened understanding between them. In the end, Lisa and Dan emerged from this ordeal stronger, their marriage fortified not just by love, but by a realistic understanding of each other's weaknesses and strengths. They appreciated each other more, not despite the challenges, but because of what they had overcome together. Their journey was a testament to the power of communication, honesty, and commitment in healing and strengthening a relationship.